to the Almost Daily Zencast. I am your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Today is Monday, October 19th, 2020. It's 11:17 a.m. I just missed being on the air at 11:11 by 8 minutes. Hello and namaste, dear friends and listeners. All 270 of you. What? Welcome and thanks for tuning in. I am here and I am ready to talk to you about crazy stuff going on in the world. Show the deep, probative question of free speech. That's right, free speech. That beloved and cherished birthright that I think we all believe we have. It's right up there next to free will. And of course, there's much debate and discussion about it and how it works. Welcome to the show, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. That opening track in honor of the season, even though I don't celebrate this holiday for reasons quite specific, which I will get into if you want to hear about. But I still want to tip. I'm still, respectful of others' compliance with things I may not agree with. And so a tip of the hat to the spooky season. That was Epic Soundtrack 101 Remix Spooky Season Opener. Sometimes the titles are not very original, but they are my own, or rather that of my alter ego, DJ Zed, the fictional animated cartoon DJ character that one day I will finally produce and be able to slap on things on the interweb while you listen to me talk. From the Endless album series Starting Over. I think I put it in volume 3. I don't know. Regardless, we are here and the show has begun. As always, friends, I have a moment of wrestling with the very question of what to bring to you as audio brain candy for your ear holes. And I ask myself, where do I begin? I did a whole episode where I ranted on that. Where do I begin? And I remembered today, and I don't know who this should be properly credited to, but whoever they were one genius snark. And that, in my book, is a compliment. I mean, hands down. Not a detraction, not an insult or an attempt at, but a compliment. So, whoever they were, this genius snark of yesteryear once replied to that ever endless question that questions and begs an answer in the following fashion, with the following statement. Quote, and I love this phrasing of it, and I literally have heard people say this, right? So it's not just an abstraction. people, I think this is something that might pass as common sense, if there really is such a thing, which I doubt. In fact, I argue against it actually existing, for those of you following along really closely, in some episode or another. Put a pin in that if you haven't heard that episode. The pins are just reminders of things you want to track down and listen to, right? If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry. Just buckle in. It'll all make sense in a minute once you catch up with like 3 or 4 episodes. So, this genius snark of yesteryear, whoever they may have been, and I would venture to say the very first person to say it in my fantasy fiction like universe would have to have been a woman, right? Woman of a certain age and of a certain level of like full snarkiness in that beautiful, sparky way that women have. And I say that all, in admiration of womanhood, for they are portals directly from the void through which life produces life. But someone once answered the question, where to begin, with the following statement. Well, you could start at the beginning, work your way through the middle, and stop at the end. And I don't know if I got the tone right or not. And I'm not trying to be dismissive, and I'm not complaining. I think that's a brilliant, beautiful, blunt, cosmically obvious, but also like challengingly enigmatic statement to make. And, I'm a creative weirdo, right? I'm a experimental playwright that's only ever finished one play. And then only with a large company of facilitators and actors and stuff. But I digress. My initial response to that is easier said than done. And yet, for whatever reason, I found it charmingly meaningful that actually came to me. I think probably like somewhere in the pre-dawn hours, because I got up at some absurd time of day today, folks. Don't know why, just popped open awake with like a compilation of some of the most lurid and warning, potential spoilers for anyone who hasn't caught up with this totally meaningless, but also totally awesome piece of media here. Ooh, I didn't mean to throw in that slight. I mean, my own reference is meaningless, not the media itself. But I, for whatever reasons, woke up today. Well, for the obvious reasons that I watched the season finale yesterday of this certain show, which I have yet to name. I woke up this morning with a compilation of all of its most gorific imagery. And it being October, and myself having, in a former lifetime, sort of ventured into the world of horror fandom in an earnest attempt to sort of make a comfortable space for myself there. And I know that this is all really random, folks, but welcome to the show. Let me finish this rant and I'll come back to you. About what this show is all about today. But I occasionally, on a strange and creepy October, attempt to sort of indulge in quality horror cinema and or television if it's out there. And this year is quite the year, and I don't want to go off on a tangent. And I actually am very seriously contemplating doing like a totally irrelevant movie review or media review episode of this show, even though there's already plenty of people and influencers and whatnot talking about it. And I don't really know the rules about doing that. But I digress. This show is powerful, dark, deliciously, appropriately horrific. Like horror and gore-ific. It's like And it's also super mainstream, right? Because it's on a major cable network channel, which I would love not to be sued by. In fact, I would love the home box office network to pick me up and have me do crossover episodes with some of their other podcasty type shows. In fact, I was about to name one off, but then I realized I would do it with all of them, however many they may be producing. But I digress. I'm way off the map here, folks. Today's show is about free speech. And it's my free speech right to kick off any show and then ramble off about crazy things. But I really confronted the question, where to begin? Where to begin? In a serious sort of, there was mild nausea involved, massive writer's block, to be a stereotype, a living stereotype. I am, once again, in my mid-40s, as frighteningly close to the movie paradoxical stereotype of starving artist as anyone cares to ever get, without actually being like, living on the streets, impossible con artist of a guy that's somehow stringing it together, as the true archetype would imply. But I digress. The universe is become a cartoon comic book place where there is literally a cartoon comic book show about how cartoon and comic booky, the world has become vis-a-vis those that are in power here in Trumptopia. And I come full circle. Right, so where to begin? Easier said than done. Well, I woke up really uncomfortably early in the morning, somewhat artistically traumatized, but also in awe. Let me come full circle on that tangent. I am in awe and admire this show, despite it being a product of Hollywood and all the possible, critiques and or crazy things you could say about something that is a product of Hollywood. Because as media and as I've consumed it, it is a powerful kick to the face, as science fiction horror should be, about deeply probative things wrapped up in the brain candy / eye candy that delights a broad swath of the world's media consuming audience, which transects or cuts across political bandwidth and positions, right? So, as I have in the past, previously, honestly, genuinely, personally endorsed from having watched and fancifully presuming I'm worthy of the right to give an endorsement for anything that's on any other platform. And I don't know if I'm technically not supposed to be doing this, but if I am, I apologize, and I will formally cease and desist as long as no one sues me, and or, until I get picked up and I have financing and a studio and the means by which to produce this more appropriately. But this show is epic, but pause here before I do actually give a real life endorsement. And I know my endorsement means next to nothing in the world of endorsements, but still, it means something to me. And I don't recommend movies that I don't actually think are worth the time in watching. And I don't buy into any extreme enough conspiracy theory, because of my own conspiracy theory about conspiracy theories, to be too troubled by any of that complicated overthinking of the issue. And that might offend people, and that might not offend anybody. Who cares, right? Say what you got to say. This piece of media is powerful and awe-inspiring and exceptionally well crafted. And although pushing my like comfort limits of how much horror I care to consume and how gory it is, it gets a strong like real life thumbs up, and like people should watch this unless, warning, you have a really really like delicate palette when it comes to special effects and gore and the those sorts of things, those tropes and those sorts of effects, and therefore visual imagery goes. If you just don't have a taste for it, if you or patently refuse to consume it, by all means don't watch it. But drum roll please. No, there should be no mystery here what I'm talking about. But wow, is Lovecraft Country something of a moment, like defining moment, encapsulating bit of wild probative, meaningful, and dare I say important mainstream media that for those with the stomach for horror and the graphic kind of content that comes with that is really truly worth watching. And for those who don't have the stomach for that, or just for all the sane reasonable reasons that you would, like, this is not for kids, obviously. And I'm sure there are people out there that have probably watched this with their kids, and I'm just throw the question out there, like, how do you not set boundaries? Like, don't watch this with your kids. Don't watch, there's plenty of movies. I'm a weirdo about this. Like, I consider film a very specific kind of art, and I give it a lot of license. And I come from, the academic type of enthusiasm or nerdiness of film, where it's like I wanted to be a jack of all trades in the world of film at some point. And I kind of took myself seriously, right? Having achieved nothing, you can judge me as you will, but obviously it's never too late, etc., etc. I digress. My point is, my opinion about film, I just don't go diving into whatever experience and going, oh my God, you really should watch this. But certain ones I will definitely get behind. And this is one of those. And it reaches to the very top of the list right now, as in, like, it now wins that category for me and probably will for decades. Because I am, quite frankly, although I have some friends that are really serious, like, horror, gore fans and nerds about it, I personally am sort of much more vanilla than that. And that I have, a certain tolerance, because I was in my youth quite fascinated with the very craft of special effects, and sort of didn't have, once I was like granted adult access to being my own person and watching films as a young transitioning teen into adult, I didn't have any preconceived notions other than my own parents' sort of basic general limits of decency, right? And I think this should be sustained. I don't believe in like exposing toddlers and children who don't understand what they're watching to really intense, horrific, violent content of any kind from any filmmaker for any excuse, right? And the laissez-faire sort of kids watch what I watch kind of approach, I earnestly question. I try not to judge, because I try to be one of those people, hippie, new age, transcendental, non-judgmental, let's all be peaceful, love-based, forgiveness and healing type weirdo. But I definitely think boundaries are appropriate, and I kind of set myself a boundary there for myself and sit on this side of it, even though I have zero plans of making children, which for many people completely invalidates that entire opinion, which I can kind of agree to disagree to accept that. Like, I'm never going to, like, preach at a parent. If I have a friend who has children and is, like, they want to watch crazy slasher movies with their kid that's under 10, I'd be like, I would never do that, but I'm going to leave your house and not have any part. And openly sort of poke fun at you a little bit about it, but bless your heart, your kid doesn't... I hope your kid does not grow up to be a serial murderer or something, right? Like, Haha, punchline. Is that the joke? I don't know. How stand-up comedians must hate this time of year, and by that I mean all of 2020. I know I do, but I digress. What the fuck are we talking about today? Free speech. And now, for a little mental, moment to reset. That's the show. No, the show's not over, folks. The show is just getting started because I'm about to go off on my real deep thoughts about free speech. Hang tight. But first, a little bit of Muzak to purge the palate. I really went off on a tear there, didn't I, folks? That's okay. A quick wiggle to this robot music and we'll be right back on track. Robot dancing is my favorite kind of dancing. Okay, so we're back on track. It's 11:39 on a Monday, October 19th, 2020. And I want to talk about free speech. I don't know about you, but I think that free speech, like common sense, it's one of those things that is wildly assumed, like both widely and wildly, the L in both places, en dos lugares, por favor, widely and wildly assumed to be understood. And usually in that Venn diagram, there's a bubble of like totally not understood. You know what I'm saying? And that's okay. That's one of those quirky things about being a human being. We tend to do that. Just now, when I went to the magic page of the Googles and typed in free speech, I noticed that the very first thing in the predictive text drop-down list, and in there mixed in is, of course, definition, free speech definition. There's also free speech amendment. But the very, very, very first one, and it's a history, so I think I typed this in. It has a little clock on it, which makes me think it's history. But it might be like a global one. You should try this and see if it comes up for you. But the very first thing that comes up for me is free speech excludes threats of violence. And at 24:24, chimey moment. Oh, I'm too far away. I put the bell away over there and I can't chime it for moments like that. I'm going to venture to say that I think that's true. And if I'm wrong, I'll apologize to everybody. But also, it ought to be true. Don't you agree? I do agree, because who needs random threats of violence being threatened at them? Let's back things up. Let's get a moment of framework here. It's 2020. It's been a roller coaster of a year. And when we, as creatures with mouths that we talk through, ride roller coasters, we tend to make noise, laugh, impulsively, scream, yell, and sometimes babble incoherently. I myself have been guilty of letting rip loose a few too many expletives on a ride that was a bit gnarlier than I thought it would be at one of those big, theme parks, which shall remain nameless because I don't remember which park it was at. I don't remember which ride. And I've been to a handful of theme parks in various places in my humble life. So we are living through quite a cornucopia, if I may borrow that term, from the upcoming politically incorrect holiday that is Thanksgiving. And although I am not a political correctness Nazi. I don't associate me with that. Although I think there's some valid points therein. I don't want to be accused of being one of those totalitarians of any ism, because I'm not. I'm one of those thread the needle down the most middle path, most organic kind of guys, right? If that even makes sense to anybody, with all the hyperpolarization. Free speech. We can spend a lifetime discussing it, but here's a few things that I would like to say about it right off the bat. This is my podcast show, and in my podcast show, I pretend that I'm a radio on-air disc jockey talking head personality, which I'm not, but I pretend, I role play that. I produce this at home. In other words, I'm not at a big media radio station. But I pretend that it's like an HBO level kind of station, which also, it's Sprecher.com and whatever podcast. And that's why my podcast is marked explicit. I don't think I talk about too many crazy, gnarly things, but I will occasionally use expletives. And in it, I use my artistic creative license coupled with my free speech as two cognizant choices that I'm making as a human being adult that lives in this country, right? And has legal rights worthy of that I'm free to exercise. To create audio entertainment content that is meant to be a bit of fantasy, a dash of satire and political parody, and a legit bit of like, I'm a concerned citizen of the world, kind of speaking truth to power, packaged in the whatever this is sort of package that I got going with it. And maybe my branding's not strong enough yet. Maybe, et cetera, et cetera. All the edges are rough. But I bring to you my genuine and sincere thoughts wrapped up in all of that crazy context of creativity. And I believe that at a fundamental level, I have both the God-given and legally protected right to do so. Inasmuch as I respect the boundaries expected by civility in public discourse, right? And basic human compassion. As if that weren't enough, there's also this question of, the letter of the law and the intent of the law, barring the threat of violence. I, as a rational thinking individual, reject violence as a valid tool for solving the problems that we face. Some would mock me, say that I'm painting myself into a corner, but so be it. Others might agree, but wonder what the solution is then. And I've got plenty to say, and I've had plenty to say before. But let's take something really specific, because I've had quite the journey, right? As I'm sure many of you out there have, if you are opinionated and are willing to opine on the social media platforms that you engage on with others, and you have any, social media acquaintances with people who are really, really entrenched in the role of avid Trump supporter. And I say this, for those wondering, with the utmost respect for all human beings. They have free speech and free rights and all the same things that I discuss in terms of how I think I would apply for myself, I believe, are automatically granted to all other people, right? Like, that is the sort of greatest good, or the common denominator that we're all supposed to be striving for, right? I think, dare I be so bold as to say that idea, that kind of idea that I just articulated, is what, in truth, progressives are trying to make progress towards. Perhaps, I don't know, as opposed to all the other shades of evil that they get portrayed. But I digress. We get into some thorny issues, right? Like, where do these rights that we talk about, human rights or otherwise, where do they come from? Why do we have them? Who can take them away from us? Can anybody take them away from us? Are they really being attacked and or stripped away from us? Or are we being manipulated to do other silly things under the fear mongering of such a threat? Or is it a combination of all three, right? Like, too many questions. But one of the things that has stood out to me during this roller coaster time, if I may take a moment to discuss, kind of put all the pins on the wall and then take a moment to sort of veer to the right here for a hot second. And it's one of the questions that should be a big, sort of scary red flag, in my opinion. Let me take a moment to rephrase. No matter what else has gone on in the last 4 to 10 years, this is still, is it not, the United States of America? Question mark, question mark, question mark. I ask philosophically. I ask with enthusiasm, with love and admiration for the bill of goods that was sold to us in its varying packages, in the most aspirational highlights of all the best stuff, right? In the most sort of, trying to be inclusive also, and be, make the stand of there is that to agree to. Why? Because it seems to be, as we go round and round, these ever-increasing, faster paced rounds of political, ideological sparring and debate and arguing and yelling and screaming and fighting and other things, we are being seduced away from a common ground, in my humble opinion, to say the least. And that common ground is something that, in theory, is the thing that unites us. That common ground in its, and forgive me, I say this earnestly and with a sort of attempt at truly innocent reclamation of it, in its most sincere sense, that while the cynics have rejected making America great again as a flawed tagline and pseudo-ideology, that there is sort of this unifying version, this healing, compassionate, aspirational, equality, equitable, based in all those things, iteration of how we conceive of our nation. Because we can get into all kinds of technical, nuanced discussions about politics and where it's at right now. And that is quite the complex clusterfuck of shitstorm of crazy, in my humble opinion. But we also, I think, as I like to remember or be reminded, remind myself, we are a community of communities, right? And as this community of communities, we share in common, theoretically speaking, the aspiration of being united, the aspirational strength of unity, and that we have, despite all the outlying facts and the countervailing narratives and the echo chambers and the corruptions and the problems and the flaws and the lumpy warts and ugly scars and half-acknowledged, half-buried sins of the past, etc. et al., we have a common ground. We have a plate of warm apple pie and vanilla ice cream and a little bit of cinnamon and chocolate all on top, right? We have... I know some people would be really cynical about me bringing in apple pie as a symbol of America because it's a deeply flawed symbol. But we do have this delicious... there's a reason why people come here. There's a reason why people came here. There's a reason why people are here busting their asses under the conditions they find themselves in, whether it's the upward swing of a really great couple of years with good momentum economically, or the downward crush of calamity and disaster, as we, some would say, find ourselves in today. People still come because there's room to aspire to achieve that more perfect union. An often bandied about phrase, dare I say it, and free speech is one of those linchpin things. We are emboldened by it, but dare I say, there is a toxic, abusive, narcissistic, and self-destructive, self-undermining way to look at this right, as with any right or privilege or tool at our disposal. One of the things, as I was beginning to say earlier, that has really stood out to me, especially this year, is the perpetuation, parroting, and what's the right word? I wish there was another word with alliteration, but I can't quite think of it. Programming, I guess, of the notion that to criticize this president is to be a manipulated individual. To criticize this president is to be blinded by some radical evil agenda. To criticize this president is to not be a patriot. To criticize this president is to be, wrong in the head. To criticize there's this massive rationalization array of an insane set of reasons and thinkings. That's not even a word, is it? Somewhere, somehow, a lot of effort has been put out there to sort of vilify and objectify and marginalize and or deflect legitimate criticism of this individual who happens to be sitting in residence at this particular time in this powerful seat of political power. Several episodes back, I asked quite seriously, but also jokingly, like, do people out there think that being president is temporary kingship? And I think that deep down somewhere, we never, the answer is yes, and that deep down we sort of never really gave that up, and that there's something kind of flawed there. I want to pause for a minute and get a point that I'd like to make. As I posted on my Instagram, and please do come visit my Instagram page, dear friends and listeners. If you're one of the handful of people listening to my show and you're not on Instagram, that's okay. Then come on over to Facebook. But if you are on Instagram and you like to do things like visit, please come on over. I would appreciate your social media support and engagement over at Mr. Zeppo. One word, no period. MRZEPPO. It is quite a tragedy to me, to start rounding the corner here towards the back end of the show, that it's lost on that base, those members of the Trump base, when they get riled up and hyper defensive and start freaking out and start judging and start spewing comments that are negative, because we dare criticize the president. We need to pause. First of all, actually, forever now, I've been wanting to start every show with, like, can everyone just cool off a little bit? The temperature in the proverbial public discourse room is getting a little hot. And we don't need that, right? Like, that's not, escalation is not what we need, in my humble opinion. De-escalation, consensus building, civic organization, those are the things that we need. So I digress. I posted this I'm trying to get around to this thing on Instagram. Please come on by to my Instagram, check it out. I'm trying to be more specific and kind of up my social media game and have the posts interconnect and intertwine more and have to do with episodes as they drop, and also relate to and or throw back to previous episodes that are already up. And trying to step into that whole part where I revamp the entire show and like edit and remix old episodes so that they're less ridiculously long, etc. Speaking of which, I'm at 45 minutes. Boom. I'll wrap this up. I haven't even begun to answer the question, right? What can you do? I could do a month on what free speech is. But I want to round up with this. there is that place that we can all agree on, I think, that this is the United States of America. And there are flaws. There are deep issues. There are problems. And the shining part about this shining city on the hill is that we are founded on the idea of coming together, transcending our differences, and uniting to achieve the impossible, right? That's how we got to the moon, if you believe we got to the moon. That's how, people are going to say we didn't. And that's a whole nother episode of stuff to talk about. But we can be aspirational and not be mamsy-pamsy. We can be critical thinkers and ask questions of those in power respectfully, and not just in the sort of oppositional, it's our team against your team. Because I've got, so many things you can unpack about how us versus them-ism is so deeply rooted in the politics, not just of today, but going back quite some time, and that leads to really toxic ways of default thinking that we need to untangle ourselves from. But honestly, I think that we are bombarded with ego traps that try to seduce us away from achieving those ideals. Dare I formulate my assessment in such a manner? There it is for you, folks. Right? Like, as a nation, we are called, I think, to that aspirational ideal of using free speech in vis-a-vis the mechanisms of public discourse, consciously tempering ourselves with the sort of the norms and boundaries of civility and compassion that's chosen, not transactionally, quote unquote, earned, because that's where toxicity works its way in, right? With the fundamental respect that it's everybody's fundamental right to express themselves. And that this inherently includes having a critical look at those in power, criticizing them for their actions, not via the parroting of mindless vilification stabs and character assassination mantras and meaningless indictments of nonsensical things, but on what they're actually doing and how it's actually impacting the people. We the people, right? Is that too crazy of a thought for this toaster oven to have and to put out there? And I think that this is true in a sort of transcendental way, in that you could apply this in any country under any context, and if the laws and or constitutions of the countries out there don't quite live up to that standard, then that's the standard that they need to be fixed up to, and healed. I don't know. Maybe that doesn't make sense, but I'm throwing it out there. That free speech is a fundamental human right. As long as we're not using that free speech to irrationally vilify and destroy one another, right? I think that free speech could, should, would, does perhaps, and we just don't acknowledge it, come with something along the lines of some of the do no harm type clauses, or clause, there's only one, right? Do no harm, of the Hippocratic Oath. That there should be a free speech oath that becomes a pledge that isn't too brainwashy and that isn't too criminally limiting of speech, because there is always that present danger, but that is also robust enough to address the issue, the problem, the fundamental scourge of Kool-Aid in the form of neurolinguistic programming, propaganda in spoken word and or written word, distributed language. Free speech should not protect crazy things that make people do crazy bullshit. Or should it? I don't know. I guess this might be a multiple part episode, and I wanted to just bring us around to that question. I don't know. I certainly have, I don't know what I know. I also know what my opinions are. I do know this. Ultimately, and you can insert any name of any president in the following. I want to say that preemptively. In other words, when the Democrats get their next Democratic candidate into the White House, I will stick by the statement in as much as that it should be part of the standing norm, right? But it's much more poignant now, especially given some of the potential extremes that people are taking the idea of, quote, defending this particular president, which may or may not be reasonable extremes. But we can have a whole nother episode about that. I'm not saying this to offend anybody over there on that camp, and I'm certainly not trying to earn their ire. I'm hopefully not, it is hopefully not lost on all those who tune into my show, whether to this episode or any others, that ultimately my objective is a peaceful one of setting aside our political biases to unite around that which actually we can unite around, which unites us. That those things are more important. And that sometimes we need to stand our ground with some boundaries, right? And this is me taking that moment, belaboredly so, but here it is. Finally, drum roll, please. There's no drum roll effect. I had some effects queued up, and then something happened, and there's no effects on my little effects panel. Sprecher, if you're listening, sometimes those things just get dumped, even though I spent time a couple of days ago dropping some things on this panel so they'd be here. It was same. Anyway, drum roll, please. Where was I? What was I going to read? And again, I say this with human respect and for the sake of comedy, and also, can everybody take it down a notch? Because things are getting a little bit too intense out there. But seriously, folks, if Trump supporters don't like it that we have the right to criticize the president, then they are free to consider their own offer that they make to others of maybe moving away to somewhere where that is illegal, because that is not illegal here. And here I get to something kind of important. There is, I think it's important to point out, a sort of dramatic drifting of the meaning of certain ideas that are sort of core to Americana. And we need to have a really sincere, really probative, really, hopefully, I pray, cathartic conversation about that. I don't just mean us, you and me, dear listeners. And I certainly don't mean right here and now, because it's almost 12 p.m. and I've rambled at you long enough for one segment. I mean the nation and perhaps the world at large. And that's just one of many pins to put up on the board, right? Curiously, I spent the whole episode winding up to that statement, and I'm not even here to bash the guy, okay? But my point is that free speech is critical, and we're going to, as you may have noticed, we have been going through a sort of roller coaster ride of escalation, of flirting with that difficult to define boundary of where free speech ends and other forms of speech begin. And that's quite realistically, quite honestly, quite earnestly, a kind of scary place for us to be. And the truth of the matter is, I think, we've been closer to this line than we've given it credit, like the whole situation. And we're just really bringing it into very sharp focus now. I am reminded of something that I responded to in the late night moment of like, I was supposed to be asleep a little bit ago, but I'm still kind of scrolling around, and I just found this thing and I really got to respond to it. And I don't remember the phrasing, and I'm not trying to troll anybody, but this was an interesting question. And it was posted by a Facebook acquaintance to some group that we're both members of, I believe. I think. So it might be hard to find. But badly paraphrased, the question was like, how can we achieve the goals of like a better society while like groups of people, groups / movements or organizations, are transactional, and there's problems there, and individuals are flawed, and there's problems there. Like, how do we get people as individuals and people as groups to stop treating each other in all those different intersections badly? And my initial response, my knee-jerk response was like, by transcending both those paradigms. At any rate, I've rambled on long enough at you folks. Thanks for joining me. Stay tuned, as I will be attempting to be on a little bit more often, as that is, in theory, the goal. Make this truly an almost daily show of different shapes and formats for you to enjoy the variety and the nuanced difference. And I thank you for your time and for your thoughtful contemplation of the weird, crazy things that I bring to your attention one way or the other. I hope it all starts to connect many dots for you. And I send you off with a short little song that I do believe DJ Zed has titled Let's Vibe the High Tribe, an old school Hip Hop 101 remix from the imaginary album Starting Over, Volume 4. Remember, folks, if it doesn't help you heal, if it doesn't help other people heal, should we really be investing our energies when the calling, cosmically speaking, when the calling at a cosmic level is heal thyself? As always, friends, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. Thanks for tuning in. Drop in for more as new episodes and old episodes, etc., blah, 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 blah. And drop on by to the social medias. Let the show know that you like the show. The Almost Daily Zencast. If you type that in on Facebook, you should find the Facebook page. Peace out.